In the 1920s, Dr. Martin Luther King Sr. was a sharecropper. When it came time to settle up at the end of the year, he did not allow the landowner to cheat him out of his money due to the fact that his son corrected the landowner when it came to the math computations. Thus, he was kicked out, and the story picks up.
His family had slept on the side of the road for a few days in a wagon until later his mother ironed for allowed them to move into a shack in the back of her house. His father was always angry at him. He criticized him and cursed him constantly. White people, as Michael recalled, white people rarely called him Michael. They always called him nigger. As a grown man, Martin Luther King Sr. said, most white folks thought a Negro was not a human being, just a thing. They said cheating a nigger ain't doing anything wrong. It's like playing a game, because most of the time they are too dumb to know the difference now. Racism and mistreatment by white people demeaned his father's manhood and drove his father to drink a lot of whiskey and filled him with a fiery anger. His father became known in Stockbridge, Georgia, as a crazy nigger. Michael King was licensed to preach at 14 years old. At the age of 15, he left home without telling anyone of his departure. He worked on the railroad as a fireman. That's the man who put the coal in the engine. Very dangerous job. When his mother discovered where he was, she carried him to the train depot and told his employer that he was only 15, although he had told them he was 20, and they believed him because of his large stature. He was fired, and his mother would not allow him to get the money that he had earned. He returned home with his mother and became an itinerant preacher. His preaching impressed many congregations throughout the rural counties, and he was paid in goods such as fruits, vegetables, sometimes a hog, something that he could barter for some of the things that he really needed, such as a pair of shoes or a suit. He often came to Atlanta to sell the items that he received from different congregations. By the age of 18, he was making many trips to Atlanta, where he met a young girl who introduced him to banking so that he didn't have to stuff all his money in his pocket. On an occasion, her father, a Methodist pastor, asked young Michael King to speak. He preached using the same cadence, delivery, and dialect that impressed the country folks, and not the Methodist folks. He felt they were smirking at him because he was country and uneducated, and they were. At the age of 20, he moved to Atlanta, where he worked in a tire factory, and he drove a delivery truck. His older sister, Woody Clara, had lived in Atlanta for about a year before he came. She impressed upon her brother that an education was what he needed. He resisted all that talk about school because he thought he knew everything. He was the smartest boy in the country school. He learned faster and more than everybody. His sister reminded him that being the smartest in the country school was different. This is Atlanta now. After a while, he decided to stop by the Bryan Preparatory School, where his sister Woody Clara was attending classes and take an entrance exam. Michael later talked with the registrar, and he was told if he wanted to attend that school, he would have to start in the 5th grade. He said he almost fell out of his chair. He was almost 21 years old, and he had to learn what a 10-year-old should already know. Wow. He realized that it was evident that he was illiterate. He knew if he wanted an education or a high school diploma, he would have to work and pay for it himself. Because in 1920, the Board of Education did not fund high schools for Negroes. There was not a single high school in Atlanta, Georgia that enrolled a black student. All high schools were white only. So he enrolled in the Bryan Preparatory School and diligently studied the rules of English grammar. He realized that grammatical correctness is not gratuitous. He can never achieve it without knowing the rules of the English language. He received his high school diploma in 1925. He married Alberta King in 1926. He graduated from Morehouse College in 1930 with a degree in theology. And one of the most speculative questions about Michael King was how he became Martin Luther King Sr. Michael King's father, James Albert King, had two brothers, one named Martin and one named Luther. Michael's father had always contended that at birth he named his son Martin Luther King. In 1933, Michael's father on his deathbed asked Michael to make his name officially Martin Luther King, and he did. He said it was not hard because he did not have a birth certificate, so he registered his legal name as Martin Luther King, and little Michael became Martin Luther King Jr. Even though he changed his name, my grandmother never called him Martin Luther King. She always called him Reverend Mike because they were childhood friends and they were raised up together. They would come by our house to have all those intellectual conversations using words that nobody understood. So I got me a dictionary. So I started learning. There is another contrasting version about the name change from Michael to Martin. Isaac Newton Ferris, Martin Luther King Sr.'s grandson, said his grandfather, after traveling in Europe as a young minister and learning of the philosophy of the Protestant reformer of the Christian church named Martin Luther, he says, my grandfather returned to America and changed his name. He says, no coincidence that the greatest theologian of the 16th century has the same name as the greatest theologian of the 20th century. Now, this was written 33 years after Martin Luther King Sr.'s death. And I'm inclined to believe what Martin Luther King Sr. said about his name change. That's my take. As a patriarch of the King family, he was a devoted husband to Alberta Williams. He's the father of 3 children, Martin Jr., Christine, and Alfred Daniel. He cherished his grandchildren, who affectionately called him Daddy King. He became Daddy. The name Daddy King originated with his grandchildren in 1964. Daddy King was a minister of Ebenezer Baptist Church for 40 years. He was a spiritual leader, civil rights activist. He was triumphant in winning voting rights for blacks in Atlanta. He preached 12 commandments. The 11th commandment was own your own home. The 12th was educate your children. Daddy King's disdain for racial inequality and segregation was the catalyst that inspired his son, Martin Luther King Jr., to fight for social change and to fight against injustice. He challenged the Board of Education about paying black teachers less than white teachers. He protested against the water fountain in public places that said white only. He was very influential in politics and active in the Atlanta Voters League. Before Jimmy Carter announced his bid for the presidency, he asked Daddy King to support his candidacy. Daddy King endorsed Carter after King was assured that his friend Nelson Rockefeller, a Republican, was not running for president. Daddy King declared, nothing that a man does takes him lower than when he allows himself to fall so far as to hate anyone.
Whoa. The third and the first person. It's a lot easier that way. And I'm saying this, I don't want y'all to be confused, but I will be betraying him. Now, my granddaddy was very, there's nothing I can do to really, between my granddaddy and my daddy, you know, they were very active in their lives, civil rights. So I'm the oldest son, and I have felt pressure all of my life, really trying to live up to what my family has done before me. So I'm going to give as objective an account of my life so far, because I still got a lot of living left in me. I was born October 23rd in 1957, so I'm 61 years old. Now, given the history of my family, I grew up rather shy and was not that involved because of my family in front of me. The oldest sibling was Yolanda, and as all of you know, she passed away. And I'm the oldest son. And my career has been, you know, I am really trying to move forward. I am a community leader now. I am trying to be, and I'm a human rights advocate. And as such, I have really traveled all over the world. I have, through my family's reputation, I've been able to meet most of the most important leaders in the world. So my goal now is to try as much as I possibly can to utilize that and make this world a better place. I am married. I married in 2008. I have a daughter, one daughter. As a matter of fact, the only grandchild of my mother and father. I try to keep her out of the limelight because she's 10 years old. She goes with me on all the trips that I have undertaken. Now, I'm going to give a little bit, and I was the 4th president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. I'll probably get back on that because, you see, there was some controversy involved in my leadership of that conference. And I don't know how many of you know that, but I'm going to try to be as objective as possible. They criticized me basically because they said I was inept, I appointed the wrong people, and I really did not have the interest of the SCLC in heart, but I really did. It was founded by my father, by the way, the SCLC, he and Raphael Abernathy. They founded it, and I became the 4th president. But I really kind of shirked my duties, and because I really did that, they admonished me. They actually took away my leadership. So I was able to have a meeting. I met with them, and we discussed the problems, and we had a compromise, and I got rid of I appointed some guy who didn't even know what the SCLC was all about. He was from New York. But a lot of times, you know, people are presented to me their credentials, and I tend to take it on face value. But in the meantime, I have reconciled my differences. I reconciled my differences with the SCLC, and they invited me back, and I was able to complete my office. Another part, I am a member of the Democratic Party, which is unlike my father, who did not become a member of any party. Now, I don't know at this point whether or not that's going to affect my effectiveness, but I am a member of the Democratic Party. And I also want to bring in the fact that I was elected in 1987 as a member of the Fulton County Commissioners. So I tried the political end of it, again, based upon my history and my family's history. It was incumbent upon me to make my own way. Unfortunately, my own house was not in order. And they discovered, and you can't hide it when you are a member of the public, that I had over $200,000 in back taxes that I owed, so I was not reelected. So I realized then I have to get my house in order, and maybe politics is not what I need to be involved in. So, I just kind of backed off of that. You understand? You have to find what your limitations are. And while I'm talking about the controversy, I may as well bring in my brother and sister. You know, we have had public issues, and it's really ongoing. Even though publicly we reconcile, but there are issues that have to be settled. You know, my father gave his life to the movement, and he pretty much died not a pauper, but he was not a wealthy man when he died. But he left us a legacy, and unfortunately, my siblings and I have not really come up with a workable plan where we can distribute these funds and still do what we need to do. But we're working on that as we speak. But in the meantime, we have my mother, Coretta. She got the King Center started. I started an organization, and I was sued by my brother Dexter, and you will hear from him later. He's coming up here next. I mean, they accused me of misappropriating. I think it started with an SUV, and then it got into the money. So right now, we are still having legal issues, but I just want to impress upon everybody the fact that my life is still in the process. I am a community leader. I have a family. I am working toward the peace that my father and my grandfather before me had spent their lives working on. So I just want to end this little session on my life on a positive note, because my life is still in progress. Now, are there any questions about anything that I can help you with? Any issues about the family, about my brother and sister? You know, we're working on it, and we hope to have it, workable by the time, before it gets too late. Yes, sir.
I have a question.
Yes.
Do you believe, like Dexter believed, that James Earl Ray was not the only murderer of your father?
Absolutely. You know, all of us siblings are in agreement that James Earl Ray was put up to doing that. There is an open conspiracy, and I'm glad you brought that up. We don't know yet. At least we have, because we reconciled with James Earl Ray. We had meetings with him over the years and became convinced that he was not, in fact, the only assassin of my father. So that's a very good question. I hope in my lifetime that we will be able to answer that conspiracy. But right now, that's all we have is what they found him guilty alone. Let's pray for him. I'm not all done. Let's hope.
In a jail cell in Birmingham, Alabama, he penned his response in a letter from some clergymen who objected to his demands. He had led a peaceful march for freedom, but some objected, including some local church leaders. Those 8 prominent white clergymen wrote in part, "We recognize the natural impatience of people who fear their hopes are slow in being realized. But we are convinced that these demonstrations are unwise and untimely."
Martin Luther King Jr. wrote to those clergymen, "My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham city,
Come on, Mr. Jones.
I came across your recent statement calling our present activities unwise and untimely. Seldom, if ever, do I pause to answer criticism of my work and ideas.
Come on now.
If I sought to answer all the criticism that crossed my desk,
Yes.
my secretaries would have little time for anything other than such correspondence in the course of the day, and I would have no time for constructive work. But since I feel that you are men of genuine goodwill, and your criticisms are sincerely set forth, I would like to answer your statement in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have never yet engaged in a direct action movement that was well timed, according to the timetable of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For For years now I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ears of every Negro with a piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. It has been a tranquilizing prelude to mid, relieving the emotional stress for a moment, only to give birth to an ill-formed infant of frustration. We must come to see with the distinguished jurist of yesterday that justice too long delayed is justice denied. We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed toward the goal of political independence. And we still creep at horse and buggy pace toward the gaining of a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. I guess it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at the will and drown your sisters and brothers at will, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, brutalize, and even kill your black brothers and sisters with an impunity, when you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to public amusement park that has just been advertised on television. And see the tears welling up in her little eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children. And see the depressing clouds of inferiority begin to form in her little mental sky. And see her begin to distort her little personality by unconsciously developing a bitterness toward the white people. When you have to come court and answer for a 5-year-old son who is asking an agonizing pathos, Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean? When you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you. When you are humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs reading white men and colored when your first name becomes nigger and your middle name became boy. However old you are, and your last name becomes John. And when your wife and mother are never given the respected title of Mrs. When you are harried by day and hunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro, living constantly at tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next, and plagued with inner fears and outer resentments. When you are forever fighting a degenerated sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over, and men are no longer willing to be plunged into an abyss of injustice where they experience the bleakness of corroding despair. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. The Negro has many pent-up resentments and latent frustrations. He has to get them out. So let him march sometime. Let him have his prayers, pilgrimages to the city hall. Understand why he must have sit-ins and freedom rides. If his repressed emotions do not come out in these non-violent ways, they will come out in ominous expressions of violence. This is not a threat. It is a fact of history. So I have not said to my people, get rid of your discontent. But I have tried to say that this normal and healthy discontent can be channeled through the creative outlet of nonviolence direct actions. In spite of my shattered dreams of the past, I came to Birmingham with the hope that the white religious leaders in the community would see the justice of their cause and with deep moral concern serve as the channel through which our just grievances would get to the power structure. I had hoped that each of you would understand. But again, I have been disappointed. I have heard numerous religious leaders of the South call upon their worshipers to comply with a desegregation decision because it is the law. But I have longed to hear white ministers say, follow this decree because integration is morally right and the Negro is your brother. In the midst of blatant injustices inflicted upon the Negro, I have watched white churches stand on the sidelines and merely mount highest irrelevances and sanctimonious trivialities. And in the midst of a mighty struggle to rid our nation of racial and economic injustice, I have heard so many ministers say, those are social issues with which the gospel has no real concern. And I have watched so many churches commit themselves to a completely other-worldly religion which made a strange distinction between body and soul, the sacred and the secular. I hope this letter finds you strong in the faith. I also hope that circumstances will soon make it possible for me to meet each of you, not as integrationist or a civil rights leader, but as a fellow clergyman and a Christian brother. Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-driven communities. And some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood would shine over our great nation with all that is scintillating beauty. Yours for the peace and brotherhood, Martin Luther King Jr.